It is good to be back with you as we now begin to work through our second week of our study in the book of Nehemiah that we are calling reConstruct. We're walking through this original curriculum right here, which we would love to get into your hands, and all that you need to do in order to get this curriculum so that you can join us through this reConstruct Bible study is visit go.christtable.today/reconstruct. That is the URL. It is right there below the microphone. Go.christtable.today/reconstruct. We'd love to have you alongside us for the journey. You'll get all of the reading plan there as well so that you will be able to be with us. But we're so glad that you're here with us, even if you're just watching, and that is all that you do. We're glad that you're here. Today, we are ending in the second chapter of Nehemiah. We'll be in verses 16 through 20. So let's dig in. As we come to the book of Nehemiah, one of the things that we have kind of said at the outset here is that the traditional view and understanding of Nehemiah, the book, really is perhaps not quite truthful to what we find in the book. Nehemiah is oftentimes been lauded by the church as being an example to be followed of leadership, of fundraising, of relationship with God. But we're going to see that in all three of those things, Nehemiah actually makes some enormous mistakes, causes problems, critical errors, and may well even be doing things that are opposed to God's desires and his heart, which would mean that Nehemiah is not so much an example to be followed, but a cautionary tale to show us what not to do. So Nehemiah has received permission from the king in order to return to his homeland in order to rebuild the wall, and he has arrived to rebuild the wall, but he is on the DL. He's on the down low, and that is where we pick up the story now in verse 16 of chapter 2. The city officials, Nehemiah writes, did not know that I had been out there. He had surveyed the wall under cover of darkness 3 days after arrival, and they also did not know what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders. I had not yet spoken to the priest, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. And so it seems that nobody has any idea why this high-powered, high-level official from the Persian king's palace is there and what he's doing. And so I'm guessing that there were probably lots of conversations behind the scenes over some good Jewish wine or alcohol as to what he was doing there. Perhaps there was thought that the ruling people of Persia were going to maybe crack down on this outpost that was far away from the palace. We don't know. But what we can be assured of is that all eyes were on Nehemiah, which is why probably he went to survey the wall under cover of darkness, because everybody was paying attention to his every move. The thing here that I think that we need to recognize is that if God is behind it, you don't have to hide it. From the very beginning of this story, Nehemiah has said that God is in this, that God wanted this to be done and to be accomplished. Nehemiah has over and again said that this is God's plan, but that has not been clear from the text. In fact, what's been clear from the text is that this is Nehemiah's plan, that Nehemiah is hoping is God's plan, or perhaps hoping that God will be like, yeah, this isn't what I wanted, but yeah, go ahead and go with it. And so Nehemiah has increasingly sold the plan to rebuild the wall as being God's perfect plan for the city. And yet he's still hiding what he's doing and why he's doing it. I don't think that God necessarily had a plan with building a wall, especially for security or for protection. But what we've kind of seen hinted at is that they're rebuilding the wall to keep out the unlovables, to build a wall so that others are not able to come and learn about their God, Yahweh, come to faith in their God, and then become brothers and sisters in the blessings of the covenant. It may not surprise you that oftentimes we don't want to see our enemies or those who have hurt us or harmed us or talked badly about us receive good things. We certainly don't want them to receive blessings, which implies that they're not just receiving good things, but they are receiving good things from our God. It would be like a bully on the school ground who just takes out his anger and frustration, or her anger, her frustration on you, and then your mom sends you to school the next day with a plate of chocolate chip cookies for that individual. They didn't want the people who had harmed them receiving blessings and coming to God. And so Nehemiah is building the wall for reasons which he thinks he's hiding from God. And so he's been hiding his true desire to build the wall. Everybody knew that what the wall meant was not what God wanted. He had made that explicitly clear in the book of Isaiah. And if God's behind it, you don't have to hide it. I see this happening a lot in religious circles. I see this happening a lot with churches and pastors. I probably have done it a lot. Let's just be honest, where you have to kind of hide the reasonings as to why you're doing something, the real reasons behind why you're doing something, and trump up the spiritual reasons why you're doing it. If God is behind it, you should not have to do that, right? If God is behind it, you shouldn't have to hide what your real plans are. This is a lesson for all of us. But why don't we keep going? I said to them, you know very well what trouble we're in. So Nehemiah is now about to kind of tell them what the plan is. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and here's the leverage to end this disgrace. Now, we've heard it described in this way before, and we've said that this idea of disgrace is a feeling word. He says that we need to rebuild the gates and the wall, but he does not leverage the idea of safety or security against advancing armies, which is why they were in this situation in the first place. He doesn't sell the wall or promote the wall's reason for being rebuilt for any of those things. What he says is he uses this other emotional word, this disgrace. The word that's used here specifically is not so much disgrace as it is reproach. Not sure what your English translation uses there for the word, but the word reproach is the exact word that's used there in the Hebrew, at least the closest English translation to that. Now, reproach is not a word that we commonly use, and so I want to be sure to give you the Hebrew undertone of that word, which means there is a hint of casting blame or scorn on someone, and it could be translated as taunting or mocking in some instances. And so this idea that there is no wall there points to this idea that the wall isn't there because they were blameful for doing something, that there was a reason behind the tearing down of the wall that was beyond simple advancement of an opposing army. And that is true. The reason they had built the wall in the first place was to keep people out. And in so doing, they ended up keeping God out. They did what was right in their own eyes. And so God, the text tells us, sent in an invading army in order to tear down all of those things that were standing in the way of other people and him. Discipline. And so this wall being torn down is a constant reminder, excuse me, this wall being torn down is a constant reminder of their mistakes. This wall being absent is a constant reminder, not just to them, but to all of the other people, tribes, nations around them, that they had failed. It is, it's an Ebenezer, it's an omen, it's a symbol of their failure. And so by rebuilding the wall, they're going to be able to end this physical representation of how obvious it is that they're a failure or were a failure. And so its absence mocks them. This isn't a good or godly reason for building a wall to save face, to end your shame or scorn. In fact, sometimes those things are a good reminder that prevent you from going back to doing the very thing that caused the shame, the scorn, the reproach, the disgrace. If we remove all of the reminders of what we've gone through, we are likely to repeat history again. Boy, how many examples could we give here from U.S. history, from world history, from books and libraries to our own lives? Whenever we come to a place where we are so ashamed or so angry at being reminded of the things that we have done wrong, that we remove all text, all language, all symbols, all statues of the things that we have done wrong, we are in danger of repeating those things. And a step worse, maybe, is leaving those things and then using them as a celebration, rewriting the story to be positive rather than negative. We see that happen a lot today in the world, in the nation, where we want to erase the truth of the bad parts of history that we don't like, or rewrite it to say something else than what really happened. This isn't going to work and doesn't work for Israel any more than it's going to work and doesn't work for you or for me. Reminders are a good thing. If they bring guilt and shame, that doesn't mean the reminder is broken. It means that we have not yet healed, forgiven, and moved on to good health. Let's keep moving. Emotional manipulation is not of God. This is what we see Nehemiah doing here. Emotionally manipulating people in order to do what he wants by leveraging God, God's blessing, God's plan, God's design. This happens, sadly, in religious institutions, faith communities, houses of worship, even today. And you say, so is it wrong to be emotional? There are lots of streams of Christian thought that say emotions are wrong. I don't think that's true at all. If somebody is moved emotionally, that's not wrong. But if somebody is trying to intentionally emotionally move you, that is manipulation, and I would say that that is wrong. So intentional emotional manipulation is not of God, and manipulation implies intent. And so emotions are of God. Being emotional is of God. Emotional manipulation, not of God. So I told them, Nehemiah says, about the gracious hand of God who has been upon me, and about my conversation with the king. And they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. The king is behind it. God is behind it. Who are we to say that God is wrong by moving with his gracious hand? He's telling them what they want to hear, but they should have asked more questions. It's not true. He's ascribing God's gracious hand to the fact that he received the king's blessing and resources. But a great part of the reason why he received those things is because he manipulated the king. And even so, success, it's something oftentimes we don't understand. We talked about this a little yesterday in Sunday services. Feel free to go back and watch it. But just because something succeeds doesn't mean it's a success. Just because his plan to rebuild the wall succeeds, that does not mean that it is a success that he's done this. And there's resistance. Resistance is often painted as being anti-God in religious circles. Sometimes resistance is God. Sometimes the resistance that comes to something that a church or a pastor or a religious leader is doing, sometimes that resistance isn't resistance against God. Sometimes that resistance is God. Nehemiah is going to receive a lot of resistance, and it's going to be up to the reader to kind of determine whether or not that resistance is against God or of God. So in Sanballat, Tobiah, those two names, not unfamiliar to us previously in the text, and Geshem, a new name, the Arab, heard of our plan. These are governors of areas that surround the area that Nehemiah now governs. They scoffed contemptuously. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? The king had issued a standing edict that the wall of Jerusalem would not be rebuilt. That was the last that they had heard from the king. And so Nehemiah replies, the God of heaven will help us succeed. See, what are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They ask a question about the king and about the legal status of what Nehemiah is doing. But look at how he answers. He answers by taking it spiritual. The God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall, but you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. It baffles me why Nehemiah didn't just say, hey, the king has changed his mind. Let the reader consider the reader's opinion on this subject. Why, when asked a direct question about whether or not he is defying the king, why does he immediately jump to there is a higher authority than the king? It triggers him. Why does this question trigger him? Maybe he was insecure. The God of heaven will help us succeed. We are his servants, not you. We are his servants, and we will start rebuilding this wall. I imagine if they had gone to the king with their complaint directly, Nehemiah must wonder if they would have succeeded in convincing the king that Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall for the wrong reasons. So Nehemiah jumps to the God argument, which I've seen this done. You're in an argument with somebody, you're in a conversation, you're in a difference of opinion over something practical. Whenever somebody pulls out the God card, it's intended to be a smackdown, a slam, an ace in the hole, there is no further court in which you may appeal this to because God has said. So they pull out the Supreme Court card and say, here it is, here's the decision of God. Deal with it. But it interests me, and with this we'll close, you have no legal right, no share, or no historic claim in Jerusalem. This is part of the reason why we know that Nehemiah is building the wall not just for security, but for an ability for there to be a barrier from him and the Jewish people and people they do not like or approve of and believe that God should not like or approve of, even though God has said, my desire when the people return to the city is that all nations, all tribes, all tongues, all people would come and worship the one true God. They're rebuilding this wall in order to prevent that from happening. And we know that on the basis of multiple places, but this is one of the key right here places. But you have no share, no legal right, or no historic claim in Jerusalem. Get off my land. Get out of my religion. Nehemiah, sadly, is not reflecting the heart of God here. The heart of God is always inclusion over exclusion. Are there moments where God seems to exclude people from his kingdom? It would be difficult to read the Bible with any honesty and integrity and say that, no, there are no places where it seems as though God does not exclude people. But oftentimes the ones whose language is described as being exclusionary are the religious people, or those who are trying to prevent others from coming to God. The Pharisees and Sadducees, scribes and religious leaders in Jesus' day. The people who have millstones tied around their necks because of the way they treat children. How the goats are separated from the sheep in Matthew 25 because the goats did not reflect God's heart of justice and equity and equality. Those moments where it seems as though God's heart is for exclusion, those are written about people who have been about exclusion from God. But even in those passages, there are hints and shouts in moments of redemption whenever they move from the kingdom of man, a kingdom of exclusion, to the kingdom of God, a kingdom of inclusion. We get this maybe more than anything else that we get wrong in Scripture and in the heart of God and in our theologies. We get this wrong. The heart of God is always inclusion over exclusion, is always moving towards inclusion over exclusion and moving us towards inclusion over exclusion. And I have gone, once again, far too long. And so I'm going to hit pause there, and we will pick it up tomorrow in Nehemiah chapter 3. And until that time, happy reading.